This episode is brought to you by Dogfish Head Craft Brewery. The Grateful Dead and Dogfish Head have gotten the band back together with the release of Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale, a light-bodied pale ale brewed with sustainable kernels of grains, granola, and heaps of good karma for a refreshing brew that's music to your taste buds. Available nationwide, visit dogfish.com to find Grateful Dead Juicy Pale Ale in your neck of the woods. Dogfish Head Craft Brewery is located in Milton, Delaware. Please drink responsibly.
Culture evolves at the speed of light, just like your financial needs. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you in the know and ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve. We'll help you monitor your progress and give personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals and find your way to money. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download the app today.
I really do just listen to Buddy once in a while just for absolute pleasure. Like it's always fun. It's always kind of fresh. When I lived in New York, I went over to that building.
Oh yeah, 50th and Temple or his apartment.
Yeah, it's like the building where he lived. Really big and it's really faceless.
I loved when listening to the Nagras and they're doing Crying, Waiting, Hoping in January '69, and George is remembering the solo like note for note.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I think that there's a quote by Lennon. He's probably not referring to Buddy specifically, where he's saying like, I love those rock and roll days. I know them better than I know myself.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But I think that's the way you could summarize the Beatles, is they knew Buddy better than they knew themselves. It was ingrained in them. But I think that like just they gave more of a shit about Buddy and some of their rock and roll heroes. That's the core of who they were. If you really want to get to know those guys spiritually, is just to get to know those heroes of theirs, because that's what formed them. That's what made them, gave them their identity and made them feel like emboldened to do it. We all have those people that make us feel emboldened. I think Hendrix once said that listening to Dylan made him emboldened to sing, because he thought, well, shit, Dylan's not the greatest singer or whatever. He just felt like he could do it. He felt he had a kind of off-putting and unique voice for what he did. And I know that when I started doing it, Paul Westerberg was a musician that made me feel like I could do it. They're not so much gateway artists as they are bridge artists. It's like an artist will come along that's kind of your generation, and it makes you feel like it's not some alien thing. Like, I can actually do this. Like, I might be able to do this because that person can do it. Of course, it's a little deceptive because they've cut their teeth and they're brilliant and they do something no one can do. But something about what they do makes you feel like you can do it. And I feel like Buddy was definitely that for that generation. He's like a bridge artist. He's someone that makes them feel like, just kind of getting back to what you said when Clapton said he saw him just playing those chords. And, oh my God, he's barely moving one finger. And I guess I can do that, you know?
Yeah.
And I had that feeling too, watching Buddy as a kid. I felt like he's just going da 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 like this. It just doesn't look like he's doing that much. Maybe I could do it.
It's within reach. That magic is within reach. It's so empowering.
The magic is within reach. Just that ability to construct a song, even that's something that Buddy is really underrated for giving people, is that feeling that they could write a song too. And it makes you wonder, you don't spend a lot of time wondering where did he get it from.
Mm-hmm.
If you stop and you think about it, probably got it from a lot of sources, a lot of country,
right?
Names
we don't know.
Names we don't know. Some names we do. Hank Williams obviously is a big one.
Right.
You can draw a direct line from Hank to Buddy, then to the Beatles. But I do think that he created this blueprint, unwittingly or not, where he just made people feel like they could take that next step. It's really cool. Like, and I know that for a fact because he does that to me. I'll even listen to his stuff now and think, God, why can't I write a song as simple as Wishing? Why can't I write a song as simple as Every Day? A genius song. Every Day is, and it's recorded so crystal clear. It sounds like it was literally recorded yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Down to the, I know when Jody and I are recording, we've done stuff where Jody's patted his knees and he wanted to do that on something we did. I think we might have even done it on the new album on maybe on Something Beautiful or one of those tracks. There's always something about a Buddy recording that makes you feel like, I want to do that.
Uh-huh.
I want to be like that. It feels dimensional and like you can get inside of it. I mean, not to get super deep and philosophical, but from a musician's point of view, he makes things seem possible.
Exactly right.
It's crazy, you know?
It's magical. You know how it makes you feel. So that elevates it, something special. And then when it gets demysticized, and it's like, that's what he's doing. I can do that.
Totally.
And that's the most empowering thing on earth.
And the one last thing I'm just going to add, because we're sitting here talking, the Crickets were a band. This is a thing I did not know growing up, because I guess apparently when Buddy got remarketed after his death, they made it Buddy Holly and the Crickets, even for the Cricket stuff, because at that point, the Crickets were the Crickets.
Yeah.
With Sonny Curtis, they wanted to distinguish that, and also it was obviously a better way of marketing it. So what kind of got tamped down a little bit was that the Crickets themselves were a self-contained band. And that is another major prototype for the Beatles. 4 guys, self-contained, they write their own songs. There's a lead singer, 2 guitars, bass and drums. For the Beatles, it was a double entendre name.
Right.
But Crickets sang, it's a really cool name. Kind of interesting, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't know growing up that the Crickets made 2 records. That the Crickets made a record, but then Buddy Holly made a solo record too.
Yeah, they were indistinguishable on radio.
Totally.
We just knew, oh, it's a Buddy Holly song, Buddy with the Crickets.
But there were 2 LPs.
Growing up, hearing the singles, I had no idea what the distinctions were. All I owned was either bootlegs or compilations. I didn't own the individual albums.
No. When I was a kid, I went out and got that Crickets first record. What's it called again? Like Singing with the Crickets?
Chirping Crickets?
Chirping Crickets. But that second one was not reissued. The one with just that kind of austere portrait of him on the cover. It's just called Buddy Holly.
Right. On Coral, I believe.
I don't know if it's in the Lewison book, but there's mention of apparently a scene where that album first comes out and Lennon and McCartney run out to get it, or I think Lennon and Stu or something. And they put that album on and they're admiring it. It's like a big deal to them because the LP, I think it's in in the Lewison book. I'm just not sure. But it fascinates me to think of the LPs contemporaneously in his time.
Yeah.
That came
And how experience.
He did have this sort of band and solo career.
Mm-hmm.
So even that is sort of condensed into his very, very short career.
Right.
Which is like
2 careers going on.
Well, you have the Beatles and then solo, and it's just endlessly fascinating. I mean, honestly, I'd like talk about it, but I do think the fact that they came out as a band is something that really gets lost. It wasn't Buddy Holly when That'll Be the Day came out. It was the Crickets.
Right.
Yeah.
Crickets. Yeah.
Pretty cool. The Chirping Crickets.
I love the fact that 1978, alongside the film, that MCA reissue of his greatest hits, 20 greatest hits, or whatever it's called, it's got the graffiti cover on it, Buddy Holly Lives.
Oh, yeah, I have that, actually. You're talking about the greatest hits thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have that album. Yeah.
Those words were truer than they even realized when they were putting it on.
What is that from? Is that from something?
I think it's just for the album.
Is that actual graffiti from somewhere? It was just what they designed for that? Could have been.
I'm sure. I mean, a la Clapton as God.
Yeah, sure. That's a really interesting point to make. It's like there's something about just like a street word of mouth thing. It's just he predates everything, and in a way, he postdates everything.
Bookends it.
It's a cool conversation to have because I've never really done a deep dive thinking about it. I've just really just admired him. Mm-hmm. I've just been it's not even a secret thing. I've just always been a fan as a kid. I'd never really thought about it. It's not really from the Beatles.
It's independent of the Beatles, but they mesh nicely.
Well, he was just, again, like as a kid, he was enough in the consciousness on TV, in a movie, one way or another, to where I could just pretend to be him as much as I would pretend to be the Beatles as a kid, strumming a guitar or whatever, and trying to do the Peggy Sue beat, on my drums. And I just loved him. I just loved him. I can't explain why I did any more than I can explain why I loved the Beatles, but I still listen to him and love him. I'll come back around to him, especially the Apartment tapes. I don't know what it is. When I was living in Portland, this would be like 20, 25 years ago, there would be all these interesting creative nights that people would throw. And one night, friends of mine were doing a Dead Rock Star night, So I was like, well, I'm doing Buddy. I got the glasses. I got the band together. I got a great little band together. And the idea would just be like, you just try to just come out and people were really creative. The funniest thing was friends of mine that had a band called the Pinehurst Kids, the really good kind of grunge era band. They came out and did like a perfect Nirvana. It was stunning. And we followed Nirvana. And and then someone announced it was like live straight from the Surf Ballroom. And we did like 4 Buddy songs and just wore the suits, the whole Crickets thing. It was really fun. And
Wow.
and I remember getting into it and thinking like, I was like deathly serious about it. Like I was like not gonna fuck up Buddy's legacy doing these 4 songs. I just inhabited them. I came out, I got my hair cut short, I shaved, like I got the glasses, I did the whole thing, and I was just really fun,
Wow. That's cool.
And it felt really natural doing them too. Once we got into doing the tunes, I think I did That'll Be the Day, maybe Baby, and 1 or 2 others. And it was great. It was really fun and spooky. And I didn't take any planes for at least a few weeks.
It's freeze on the bus.
Yeah, man.
This story in from Clear Lake, Iowa. 3 of the nation's top rock and roll singing stars, Richie Valens, J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, and Buddy Holly, died today with their pilot in the crash of a chartered plane. Following an appearance before 1,000 fans at Clear Lake last night, they chartered a plane at the Mason City Airport and took off at 1:50 a.m. for Fargo, North Dakota. Their 4-seat, single-engine plane never made it off the ground. It crashed minutes later. It skidded across the snow for some 500 feet, and Holly, 21, and Valens, a 17-year-old recording sensation, were thrown from the wreckage. The wreckage, meanwhile, was not discovered until long after dawn. The other members of the troupe, including singer Frankie...
It's funny, I was thinking about it. Buddy's kind of actually a big one.
Mm-hmm.
It's not this tangential, like, let's see how Buddy relates to the Beatles. The more you think about it, the more you know about the Beatles, the more you know about popular music, the more you know about rock and roll and stuff, the more you realize his influence is kind of outsized. It's really big.
It's in their DNA.
Yeah.
The stories are Bill Haley came along, Rock Around the Clock, that got them fired up. And this was concurrent with Lonnie Donegan and the whole skiffle thing kicking off in England. Then Elvis rocks their world with Heartbreak Hotel. And that's like to a man. But as far as nuts and bolts, how to be a rock musician, Buddy put it within reach. And Little Richard, I think, was the performing aspect of it that really got them fired up too. So between those 2 guys, I've already done a Little Richard show. So Buddy is the one that is like hiding in plain sight. That
you
connect them to the Beatles because there's Crickets, Beatles, that whole connection. But it's so much deeper than that. And the good thing is there's some great quotes from at least John, Paul, and George about what Buddy meant to them and why it was an important thing. So if you're trying to understand the Beatles, you got to understand what Buddy was about.
Yeah. The other cool thing about it, that one thing you and I connected on was being huge Buddy Holly fans.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's one thing to go, let's explore Little Richard. And I love Little Richard, but was I obsessed with Little Richard? No. Was I obsessed with Buddy Holly? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Like as a kid, I don't know how you came to.
What was your gateway? How did you get into Buddy? How did you become aware?
Yeah, I thought you were going to maybe ask that. For better or worse, you probably know what I'm going to say.
The movie?
The movie was my gateway because when the movie came out, I was like 7, 8.
Me and my cousin, we're just obsessed with that movie. And when it came out, the Gary Busey, help me out. What's it called?
La Bamba.
Exactly. I don't know what obsessed me so much, but probably, and I was already kind of a Beatle fan as a kid, as you know, but it's just probably like just this DIY rock and roll vibe to it. He's just with his buddies in the garage and then rocketing to stardom. And it was so
you saw it when it was new?
I saw it when it was new. I saw it in the theater.
So you would have been 8 years old or so.
Yeah. I was just a kid and it's really impressionable. I mean, but it was monumental. Like it was out at the same time as Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind and these kind of movies. So it was just one of those big blockbusters that you saw.
So that is interesting because you had zero frame of reference and you're absorbing this. It's making a big, huge positive impact on you. So with that, I guess it has served a purpose. Now, I was enough of a fan of Buddy Holly by that time. We're talking a narrow window because I wasn't particularly a Buddy Holly fan up until then. I vaguely knew 1 or 2 songs of his, and it wasn't until probably concurrent with me reading Beatle history and learning that was one of their idols, and then purposely listening to radio stations that would like have a Memorial Day 500 of oldies countdown.
Right.
And that was where, because I'd be taping the stuff on cassette, like selectively. And that was where I started to hear That'll Be the Day, Maybe Baby, It's So Easy, things like that, which I hadn't really heard before. And you have to remember at that point in history, Linda Ronstadt's doing a lot of covers of
I was just going to say that he was looming large at that time because there's a 50s revival.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Beatles revival.
American Graffiti.
John Lennon just done rock and roll, and my dad played that around the house all the time, and he did a pretty ripping version of Peggy Sue on there.
Yeah. Happy Days.
Happy Days, right. The Buddy Holly story came out. And then there was that thing that you and I, it was the same thing, the Salt movie, right?
Heroes of Rock and Roll.
Yeah, the Heroes of Rock and Roll, which made a huge impression on me. And so it was just in the air. The 50s thing and Buddy was a kind of fascinating subject of the 50s.
And see, by the time the film came out, we're talking 78, I believe is the year it came out, right?
Yeah.
I guess I must have known enough about Buddy to be offended by the film. Because when I saw it, I thought, this is terrible.
I know.
Philip Norman did a book on him, which I later on read. And there was other people that eventually, I think it was in the 80s, did these bios. So it was post the Buddy Holly movie. But maybe I'd seen footage. Maybe it was the Heroes of Rock and Roll clip or something where seeing Gary Busey on the screen and his characterization really offended me because it's like, this isn't Buddy. This big hulking guy punching a producer. This isn't. I was really
watch
wrong.
It now. I'm not for a second going to recommend your audience that you run out and see the Buddy Holly. It's basic. It's mostly terrible. Whatever.
It's a 70s version trying to do the Glenn Miller story or something.
Yeah, they back then things were painted in very broad strokes. To the uninitiated, to a kid, to me, it was just a spectacular movie.
That's why I'm finding a silver lining to this whole thing is that it was your gateway, and that's a good thing because it turned you onto this lifelong journey. It enriched your fandom. It gave you a starting point, and then you found out, oh, okay, well, this was bullshit, but Buddy's the real deal. This is cool. This is great stuff. Oh, yeah.
My dad was also a huge fan. Now, they were also, American Graffiti soundtrack was big in my house.
Yeah, me too.
So, you just have all these 50s influences and oldies radio. I don't know if that was around yet, but it
wasn't Chicago.
It wasn't Chicago. It was probably in LA. And it was like oldies radio meant 50s then. That's what it meant.
And it did.
You probably
not
to
90s.
The 80s.
Right.
You'd hear Rock Around the Clock. You'd hear Great Balls of Fire. You'd hear That'll Be the Day. So
all this classic stuff and doo-wop and stuff that was part of their world.
Yeah.
We didn't really necessarily think of it in those terms, but it gave you a certain flavor that already, as we mentioned, the aforementioned Happy Days and American Graffiti, even though American Graffiti is set in 62 and they're playing stuff from 1954 in it, we got it. And the funny thing is, I listened to a lot of air checks just for fun when my ears are free.
Right.
And routinely, a 1967 air check might play a song from 1955 or something like that. They would throw that stuff in there. So it was a lot less homogenized and a lot more eclectic back in the day when we were developing our musicality.
Do you think that's because rock and roll was just rock and roll? At a certain point, it was kind of like, yeah, there were these psychedelic changes and there was, people moving into different areas and all this kind of stuff. And you had glam come in and all this, and it kept hearkening that, but it was a condensed period of time. You can look back on it now and think 1956 to 1966 is just not a long time. That's like, what are we now? 2023, 2013. Does that seem like a long time ago to you?
Not at all.
So, you know what I mean? I think that back then at the time, I think it was just still in the air. I really do. And then you look at like the influence of Buddy on all those bands. Like you can think of the heaviest British stuff like Fleetwood Mac, Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, and you had what's his name, Jeremy Spencer doing the Buddy songs.
Yeah.
Or the Beatles when they're at the rooftop period, and now you realize they were doing Buddy songs. Mailman, Bring Me No More Blues, and it was there. It was there. It was in the air, and it didn't really leave it. That's what I was kind of going to ask you is, has Buddy's influence finally waned, or is it there in other ways now? Because I actually lean towards that the influence is still there, but for different reasons. Like the lone bespectacled singer-songwriter is never going to go away.
He made it cool.
He did. He made it cool for Lennon, but then Elvis Costello, you can see it ringing through the ages, that kind of like slightly nerdy, but kind of tough rock and roller with,
it's a different archetype. Because the strong male archetype to that point was a jock or a warrior or a cowboy or something like that.
Exactly.
He's somebody that looks like he read books.
When I was a kid, even then I remember thinking, I can't believe this guy looks like that and is a rock and roll hero. even post Lennon doing that and Elvis Costello and stuff like that, but even just as a kid, just as a young kid, like Buddy Holly's story, I thought, I mean, this is terrible to say, but you got people say stuff like Four Eyes to people and all that kind of stuff. So it was like whatever kids could latch on to. And there was something really just tough about him going out the way he was.
And particularly the frames he had at the end of his life, like you're wearing today.
Yeah.
Those big in your face ones that until that point, he was super self-conscious. And he went through, I actually read an article about the evolution of his eyeglass frames and how he'd reached that point where he just said, screw it. When he got, I guess those frames were made in Mexico, the big black ones. And that was when he said, to hell with hiding who I am. This is me, loud and clear. I'm not going to try to minimize it with like wireless frames and that stuff that he had in between. So that in itself is a statement. And you're absolutely right that there was something about the wearing of glasses by a male that was considered sissy, if not outright gay or feminine or weak or whatever pejorative you want to put on it. So to be slinging a guitar like that and sounding like he did, and it should be pointed out that it's one of those things that it seems ridiculous to our modern ears, but there was a time when Buddy and the Crickets impressed people coming through the radio as a black group.
That's right.
We don't hear it, but that was how Elton John, Benny and the Jets got played on Soul Train and places like that. Because when it first came through the radio, people thought it was a black artist. They had no idea it was this white guy with glasses.
That happened straight into soft rock era. I think I heard a story about bands like Ambrosia showing up at R&B radio stations where they were like number one and people being shocked that they're white.
Right.
This has been a thing where, again, the more condensed era of rock and roll and the lack of access, visual access to acts back then. To say pre-internet is pretty redundant. It's just pre-everything. But like, why was I so fascinated with him as a kid? Like, I haven't really thought about it till this conversation, but it's a lot of things.
A lot of things beyond the visual presentation, which you had limited access.
Yeah. Like his sort of hiccupy style of singing. His look, obviously. You'd see him with the Crickets. They were a band. Even like if you ever caught footage of him, he had that weird microphone around his neck.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of mic stand-less mic. His songs were, now we can call them Beatlesque. They're obviously proto-Beatlesque, but they're very different than the other 50s rock and roll. They bear barely any resemblance to like Great Balls of Fire and that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Not even Chuck Berry, even when he did Brown Eyed Handsome Man.
Yeah.
There's something about him taking a guitar-based rock song that had a different dynamic than other people doing that stuff, like an Eddie Cochran or a Carl Perkins, which is more straight up rockabilly.
Yes. And the deeper you get into him and know about him, because again, information was scarce when I was a kid, but this book would come in or I'd find a bootleg record or something. You'd learn more and more about Norman Petty and, the recording studio.
His country roots.
His techniques, just little things like Every Day, like the beating on the knee, that was actually Jerry Allison's knee.
Yeah.
Or by Petty doing that, the Celeste, which is a very rare sound. It's a rare instrument to find now, actually. They're really, really expensive. You can get it on a Mellotron sound, but just the techniques and I don't know, you just find out more and more about him. It just gets more and more fascinating. And of course, compounded with how young he was when he died. It just creates this supernova a la Hendrix, where it's a guy who comes in almost like an alien from another planet and just goes away.
And you're talking a period of his active career. That'll Be the Day was September 57, that hit. That's the first bona fide hit by him.
Right.
A year later, he split from the Crickets, goes to New York, does the session with the orchestra, records that wonderful tape of demos in his apartment, and boom, February 2nd, he's off on the Winter Dance Party, gets killed on the road February 3rd. And what is that? Like 14 months, 15 months, something?
Yeah, he had a 2-year run in the public consciousness. So something like that. Less, right?
Right. I'm not even talking the stuff before that when with Buddy and Bob, and they were this country duo and playing bit with Sonny Curtis, who then would join the Crickets after he died. The fact that we celebrate this stuff and it had this much impact, we're talking a minuscule career that was incredibly rich. We talk about the Beatles and their 7-year run from 62 to 69 and everything they accomplished at that time. I'll take a fraction of that.
It's unreal. And again, from That'll Be the Day, I guess, is when he entered the public consciousness, and then he went out. So he came in with a bang and he went out with a bang, obviously, everybody kneed about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I think kind of tripped me out. As a kid, I was like, it just seems so short, even when 2 years is a long time to you. I could tell that he was taken too soon. And then, of course, you had The Day the Music Died, Don McLean. There was always some reference to him, like you were saying, Linda Ronstadt. Anyway, it seems like what we're talking about is like, why was he in our consciousness in the 70s as young people? You couldn't really escape him. Mm-hmm. I think when people go out like that, they leave a really long shadow. And if they've influenced a lot of people, I think it dawned on people slowly that everybody was just really influenced by him. You never hear anyone say like, I didn't like him, he was a drag.
No.
Like, you just never hear that. If it comes down to the Beatles, like you said separately, they all said amazing things about Buddy Holly and did amazing things about Buddy Holly.
And take the Beatles off the table. You've got Rolling Stones having a big hit with Not Fade Away.
That's right.
Early on in their career. It amazed me to think, we talked about Ronstadt and that period around the Buddy Holly movie. She was covering that stuff. That'll Be the Day. It's So Easy. Doesn't Matter Anymore. You've got Blondie covering I'm Gonna Love You Too on Parallel Lines.
Wow. I forgot about that.
Santana covering a cover when Blind Faith did Well, All Right. So actually would never in a million years associate with Buddy Holly or that period of rock and roll. It still resonates with them. And I think that shows to people that are tuned in, people that are creators in their own right, you're on that wavelength to where you get Buddy. It's like the only people that ever criticize Ringo as a drummer are non-musicians. If you're a musician, you totally get it. And I think it's the same thing with Buddy, is you totally get it. Once his stuff hits your ears, it's like, oh, wow. To other people, it might be just basic, dated stuff. No, there's something deeper there going on. You made reference before to Mailman, Bring Me No More Blues, which that version on Anthology was cut the day before The Rooftop.
Wow.
The first time I heard the Beatles version of that was, I think, on the Sessions album that never was.
That's when I first heard it. The session we've talked about it before, that monumental Sessions album, which I picked up as like at 14 or 15 years old. I still have my copy.
Yeah. That was 1985, right?
Yeah.
And the first thing that struck me about their jam on that, which was done at Apple Studios, is, boy, this has the same vibe as Revolution 1.
Yeah.
You can basically splice them together seamlessly.
That's right.
It got me to thinking, was that what John was going for in Revolution 1 when they laid down that version that was his preferred version? Was he channeling Buddy Holly?
That's an interesting thing to think about. And then it starts to expand. You start to read about him and you realize, wow, Waylon Jennings was his bass player and he was on that last tour. And I guess Dion was on that last tour. And
that's right.
Of course, you get into Richie Valens, and growing up in LA, you couldn't escape Richie Valens. My dad knew people, in junior high. I guess he had a friend who lost an eye from the same plane crash that Richie Valens
over his high school.
That made him scared of flying.
And that's the thing, for as nonsensical as Buddy Holly's story is, you watch La Bamba, and that's something you think is pure Hollywood.
Yeah.
No, that really happened.
Yeah, it really happened. And, you mentioned Not Fade Away. It's like, when I really think about it, Buddy Holly was the foot that I kicked off on, because before I got a 4-track recorder, and sometime in the mid-'80s, and I started wanting to record. I figured out this way of doing sound on sound. I could record into a tape player, play that back while another tape player was recording, and play to that. And I was doing the first recording I made was Not Fade Away.
Oh, is that right? We were on a cardboard box.
Kind of in my own version of it, based on listening to that Stones record nonstop. Mm-hmm. I'm not even sure if I knew it was a Buddy song. I'm pretty sure I knew it was, but I was just basing it off the Rolling Stones version, Not Fade Away. So that's technically the first recording I even made, was a cover of Buddy. Yeah.
Wow. Do you still have it?
I do still have it. Yeah. I don't even know if my voice had broken yet, man. I mean, it's really funny, but it's a really cool version because it's put into kind of a different rhythm. Going back, that's speaking to how malleable his songs were. That's the other thing about the simplicity of his songs, is another thing that's so powerful. Like, I didn't even know Well All Right was a Buddy song way after enjoying that Blind Faith record, or just hearing it on the radio or whatever for years.
Yeah, right.
No idea it was Buddy. Or It's So Easy to Fall in Love when I was a kid. No idea that was a Buddy tune. I think a sign of great songwriting is that you can do your own version of it and it can bear no trace to the original and be just as great. Whereas some people covered things like the Beatles covered people, and they, more often than not, they beat that version that they were covering.
Absolutely.
But that, not so much with Buddy. Like, you could actually transform his songs because they were so simple. Curiously, the Beatles version of Words of Love is like note for note. I think actually that's one of the few covers of theirs that don't transcend the original.
That it sticks faithfully to it.
Wait, almost too faithfully.
I love their version of it, but I think if I were to point to a favorite Buddy cover by the Beatles, it would be their version perfected by the time they got to the BBC of Crying, Waiting, Hoping.
George singing Crying, Waiting, Hoping.
Yes, that's an amazing version. I went back to that too. In fact, I got like a list of, one way or another, they did Baby I Don't Care, You're So Square. I know it's an Elvis song, but Buddy did
too.
Crying, Waiting, Hoping, Every Day. This is like, I guess at one point or another they covered in the repertoire or whatever. So Crying, Waiting, Hoping, Every Day, It's So Easy, Mailman Bring Me No More Blues, Maybe Baby, Midnight Shift, Peggy Sue, Raining in My Heart, Reminiscing, That'll Be the Day, Think It Over, and Words of Love. That's like 13 songs.
Yep.
It's an album's worth of songs that the Beatles did over their career.
Exactly right. And if you want to make it 14, because Beatles had 14 tracks in England.
Yeah.
During the I'm Mine session, they did Peggy Sue Got Married.
They did. So that's not even listed there.
And I've never heard it. I first became aware of it through Lewison's recording sessions book. So I covet getting my hands on that, but we know it exists.
You have heard it?
I've read of it, but I've not heard it.
Wow.
But I always found it fascinating. Here's Paul, George, and Ringo getting together for what in their heads they have to know is the last recording session. They're working on I Mean Mine. And so it was. And that's one of the songs they're busking through as a warm-up.
That's so crazy. It's so crazy. So they're there. So he's there at the beginning of the Beatles and he's there at the end.
Exactly. Yeah. That'll Be the Day being their first Quarrymen recording at Tracy Phillips.
And then, each of them had done something that references Buddy in some major way. So you have Ringo doing That'll Be the Day, the movie. No, it's not about Buddy.
And recording Think It Over.
There's a great jam you can find on YouTube, actually, of Dylan and Harrison doing Peggy Sue.
Yes.
It's actually pretty good.
The Silver Wilburys. Yeah.
I think Fogerty's there, but
yeah, Dylan, Fogerty, Taj Mahal.
Right. And Jesse Ed Davis.
Yeah.
And that's at the Palomino, place I used to play quite a bit. And I used to go there quite a lot. That was actually just before I used to go to the Palomino, which was a great club in North Hollywood.
Obviously, his fandom is miles deep, buying the catalog, but commemorating, starting, what was it, in 76, I think, when he bought the catalog, Buddy Holly Week in England, and doing some kind of commemoration, performing live with Denny Lane, doing that Denny Lane album, Holly Days.
What do you think of that record? I think it's pretty cool.
I think that it's a loving tribute to that music. And again, it's kind of like the Beatles doing Words of Love. It's respectful and spirited, and you can tell the love for that music that those guys possessed, for sure.
I think the greatest tribute that McCartney ever did was that fantastic documentary.
Oh, yes.
The Real Buddy Holly Story, which everyone listening to this should run out and watch, because until there's another one, that's the definitive, wouldn't you say?
That's the definitive one. He's got Sonny Curtis in there. He's got people that were still alive at the time he made it.
Buddy's brother, I think, is in.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he did this late 70s, early 80s, but it was his reaction to the Gary Busey film. I'm not alone in my take. It's like, no, this needs to be fixed.
I think everybody realized it was a bit of a farce. It's just that if it was an instrument to put Buddy
into consciousness,
I think it did its job.
Exactly. There's your silver lining.
But getting back to that Real Buddy Holly Story, I think it was produced like in the late 80s or sometime, but whatever it was, people were still around. Allison,
Bill
Malden, and I think, is Nicky Sullivan in it? He could be in it too.
I think so, because I know I've seen interview clips with him, so maybe that's where it's from.
But it's awesome. That's where you get the sum total of Paul's heart. The way the Beatles are in our DNA. I think Buddy is in his DNA.
Unmistakably so. You put your finger right on it. That is an expression of that. What the Beatles are to us, everything we do trying to explore them and celebrate them and commemorate them.
Yeah.
That was him doing it for his hero.
Yeah, and don't overthink it. To say nobody, no Beatles, it's not an overstatement. It just isn't. He is the number one catalyst for everything prototypically about the Beatles.
The two guitars, bass and drum lineup.
Two guitars, bass and drum lineup, from the name to writing their own songs to the glasses to almost the vocal approach. You can trace, obviously, I'm not surprising anyone if I were to have the opinion that Buddy's voice is very influential on Lennon more so than Paul.
And he does the straight on cop of it on Double Fantasy, which we talked about on the show before for Dear Yoko. Whereas Paul did his more obliquely with Eat at Home on Ram.
Oh, wow. Eat at Home. I didn't think about that. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And Dear Yoko is cool when you can hear those outtakes, or not outtakes, but extended versions of where you hear him talking about it to the musicians. But it's really there. It's a straight up Buddy. Mm-hmm. It makes me think, like, God, just how monumentally influential Buddy was on John, and how unthinkable his whole vibe would be without Buddy. It just makes you think. You start moving into that. Maybe it's a little premature for this conversation, but you start moving into that what if Buddy had lived thought, because you just think some things are preordained, I guess, but it's sort of like so many things would be different. The DNA of rock and roll would be so different. The blueprint of modern rock as we know it would be so different. It's really a crazy existential question. If you were just talking about rock and roll music, if the crash hadn't happened, how that would have altered the genetic material of rock and roll, I think pretty dramatically, honestly.
Conversely, do you think his premature death magnified him and gave him more resonance and power with his career ending at that point, that people who were already caught up and he was in their imaginations, therefore maybe felt some sort of obligation to carry it forward?
I think you hit on some. I think it did, because as we all know now, he was actually not, of course, we're condensing 2 years, but to him and to the greater public, he was not really being that successful at the time. His hits weren't hitting. He was kind of in a down period, is why he had to take the winter tour. Mm-hmm. He moved to Greenwich Village. He was kind of starting a new life. I think he was in a transitional period when he did die. But the funny thing is, I've always just had this instinctual feeling that he would definitely have made a comeback, and he probably would have made a comeback pretty quick, because anyone that was rising would have name checked him, and the rest is history.
I feel like he was evolving faster than the public was keeping up with him, and eventually they would have. But just right there, you mentioned him living in Greenwich Village. What's going on in that period in Greenwich Village but folk? And that becomes another hotbed of musical activity and the groups that sprang from that. The obvious things, Dylan spent his time there and basically launched from there. Peter, Paul, and Mary, the Love and Spoonful, all these acts that kind of flowed from that scene once folk kind of died out and they went on to other things. He was already there before they even dreamed of it.
That's right.
And I read a quote from Norman Petty when they did that final climactic scene in Buddy Holly's story where they've got him performing with a full orchestra. And basically, they're riffing on the last recording session he had at the Pythian Temple in New York City, doing Raining in My Heart, Moon Dream.
It doesn't matter anymore.
Doesn't matter anymore. I think there's one more song.
True Love Ways.
Yeah, True Love Ways. That's of course. So Norman Petty said that anybody who thinks that Buddy was drifting into middle of the road pop because of that doesn't know Buddy.
Right.
That he basically had to have a gun to his head to record with strings, but such was his curiosity that he wanted to try it on.
I think he was subversive. I think he was, in his own way, he was subverting. This is a young guy. This is a 21, 22-year-old kid, but he was very mature for his age, and he was subverting that idiom. And I think he would have moved along quick. In fact, a good way of sort of figuring out what would have happened with Buddy in Greenwich would be to look to Dion, because Dion was on that winter tour.
Yeah.
Then immediately following Buddy Holly's death, Dion got wrapped up in Greenwich Village and kind of became a folkie.
Yeah. And by the time mid-60s, Abraham Martin and John.
That's right. And so in that he had a little transition too. Obviously it took him a couple of years, but he had a transition.
From street corner doo-wop to that.
From street corner doo-wop to, and of course he was a New York guy. So it was a hop, skip, and a jump to Greenwich Village. But in many ways, that was almost like a universe away. And I think that could be a little signpost as to where Buddy would have hooked up with Dion. You look at Bob Dylan arriving in Greenwich Village not even 2 years later in 61.
Right.
I think January of 61.
Mm-hmm.
And so, gosh, I mean, Buddy was there. He was going to all the same haunts. I think he was going to the Kettle of Fish and Gertie's, Folk City, and all this kind of stuff. So it's fascinating to think. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is that Dylan was a Buddy Holly obsessive. He saw one of his last shows. Yes. He was there
Duluth,
at
right?
the Duluth Armory, right? So, and has that whole speech when he accepted that Grammy where he talks about like Buddy looked me in the eye, that whole crazy thing. I don't know if you've seen that.
If I was to go back to the dawning of it all, I guess I'd have to start with Buddy Holly. Buddy died when I was about 18 and he was 22. From the moment I first heard him, I felt akin. I felt related, like he was an older brother. I even thought I resembled him. Buddy played the music that I loved, the music I grew up on, country western, rock and roll, and rhythm and blues. 3 separate strands of music that he intertwined and infused into one genre, one brand. And Buddy wrote songs that had beautiful melodies and imaginative verses. And he sang great. He sang in more than a few voices. He was the archetype, everything I wasn't and wanted to be. I saw him only but once, and that was a few days before he was gone. I had to travel 100 miles to get to see him play, and I wasn't disappointed. He was powerful and electrifying, and had a commanding presence. I was only 6 feet away. He was mesmerizing. I watched his face, his hands, the way he tapped his foot, his big black glasses, the eyes behind the glasses, the way he held his guitar, the way he stood, his neat suit, everything about him. He looked older than 22. Something about him seemed permanent, and he filled me with conviction. Then out of the blue, the most uncanny thing happened. He looked me right straight dead in the eye, and he transmitted something I didn't know what, and it gave me the chills.
It's spooky, like I think that he is spooked by Buddy. And he claimed on the Grammys, that's a pretty big watched show. He was accepting the album of the year and said that the spirit of Buddy Holly was permeating the sessions for Time Out of Mind.
And I just wanted to say that one time when I was about 16 or 17 years old, I went to see Buddy Holly play at in a Duluth National Guard Armory, and I was 3 feet away from him, and he looked at me. And I just have some kind of feeling that he was, I don't know how or why, but I know he was with us all the time. We were making this record in some kind of way.
I found that fascinating. So you start getting into that connection between, of course, you have this ironclad connection between Dylan and Harrison, both Buddy Holly obsessives. It just, as you start to do the math and all the, crazy equations in your head, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And connecting all the, on your pin board, like connecting all the dots, you do see it all start to kind of coalesce. The constellation coalesces around Buddy. It really does.
Absolutely. And I thought of another one just now.
Yeah.
As you're talking. A New York scene thing, not Greenwich Village per se, but New York nonetheless. One of the recordings he did, which was a early clue to the new direction, Reminiscing, he co-credited the sax player who was none other than King Curtis.
King Curtis, sure.
And how do we know King Curtis? Well, he played the sax on those Coasters records that the Beatles loved and emulated. His career ends in the streets of New York, August of 71, having just played on the Imagine album. On right. It's So Hard and I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. Here he is in 1958 collaborating with Buddy on a song called Reminiscing, which is just tough R&B thing for Buddy. That gets picked up by the Beatles and played at the Star Club.
It's insane. And Buddy was he born in 36 or 37?
I believe 36, yeah, because he's a year younger than Elvis.
Right. And so you put it all in perspective, you realize, gosh, I mean, between him and Ringo and John, the age gap is not even that far from what Ringo is to George. You know what I mean? So
right.
You start realizing that, God, these are just all kids, but you have one generation rock and roll and the next wave of rock and roll. You cannot underestimate, and I know we're bouncing all around because that's what you and I do, but people listening could feel us connecting the dots that the crucial thing that Buddy did in 58 was do that UK tour.
Oh, yes.
huge,
That the Beatles missed.
influential. That the Beatles missed, but apparently a lot of people caught. I
Yes.
think the Hollies did catch it.
Yes, exactly.
And stuff like that.
And there is a connection right there. What do we name our group, guys?
Yeah, only named after him. But I think that UK tour that Buddy did was, you look at these little tours, he went to Australia, he went to the UK. It's fascinating to me. And apparently he was planning on going back to the UK when he died.
Mm-hmm.
If not booked, he was planning on booking the UK because it went so successful.
Sure.
And and there's pictures of him and the Crickets and,
Sunday night at the London Palladium.
Right. Sunday night at the London, unbelievable. And there's footage, is there not, of him?
No, there's pictures.
No, I'm sorry, it's a recording, right?
Yeah, there's audio, yeah. Played the Philharmonic in Liverpool.
That's insane. And how the Beatles managed to miss that show.
Corman had a gig that night.
I love that.
They're probably like, why did I miss Wings Over America?
Right.
Because I thought they'd come back next year.
Exactly. But sometimes there's this thing that happens where, I've missed shows when I was younger at that age, 15, 16, 17, because I just assumed like I wouldn't get in or something. Like I assumed it was just too big for me or I couldn't afford it or something like that.
Yeah, perfectly valid reasons.
When you're that age, you just think, oh, well, maybe when I have a job or something, you know what I mean?
You don't realize your time is so precious.
That's right. Yeah. So I think the UK tour can't really be underestimated. At the end of the day, man, he did a blitz on UK and I think that changed things immensely over there.
Yeah, we're just talking about the biggest thing to come out of England in his wake. What about all the other acts that were just as equally profoundly impacted in what they put into the world music-wise?
Sure.
So, yeah, the ripple effect is tremendous, undoubtedly.
Yeah, definitely. We're sitting here talking about him now, but like I was kind of alluding to before, I think his influence starts to mutate. Of course, at first, it's just that initial supernova of his creating all these waves that move into the 70s, even into the 80s. But you look at Marshall Crenshaw, you look at Elvis Costello, these people, there's always someone to come along. Now we're living in a time that is quite divorced from the past. In fact, to a lot of the musicians playing now, the past is problematic, or they just don't relate musically, or it's just something your granddad was into, or whatever it is. But the prototype of what Buddy Holly was and created has never died, which is to say a self-sufficient singer-songwriter, might be a little awkward, a little nerdy, a little geeky, kind of a little bit different, self-contained band and his simple songs, and kind of cuts right to the matter with his material or her material. I think that's happening right now with a lot of music that I am aware of, or I'm even enjoying a lot of young artists. Whether they know it or not, I think that it would all be unthinkable without Buddy, because again, in an era that was quite macho and quite tough, the rockabilly era where these guys were just, blazing through towns. And even though Elvis, we all know some of these guys had quite a sensitive soul, Buddy stood out. He stood out as this almost alien-like guy. And, to the point where if you see pictures, I think there's a picture floating around of Buddy and Elvis. I think there's obviously those pictures of Buddy and Waylon.
Early on, I think, when he's still the young fan of the rock star.
Right. And Buddy always looks incongruous.
Like us, like he's just another fan.
Like he's just another fan, or he's just this like nerdy guy with glasses. And even in the Waylon pictures, like someone's sticking their middle finger into the picture and they're just in a photo booth, but you can see a little bit of slyness and toughness there. And you see what, he was actually just probably pretty much a regular dude, but his outward persona, I think, is unwittingly, subliminally, subconsciously, whatever, very vulnerable. He's just a very vulnerable rock star, and his songs are vulnerable. If you made mention of the Apartment tapes, which I first heard on these bootlegs here that were so difficult for me to find when I was young, like a Buddy Holly bootleg, but all these undubbed Apartment tapes, which he did obviously right at the end of his life in Greenwich Village, they're just incredible. And all the songs, the original songs that he wrote there, are all vulnerable, brilliant, deceptively simple, all went on to have a pretty big life.
I love that Paul used them in his doc.
Yeah. A couple of these, Learning the Game, a couple of these are Peggy's Who Got Married, went on to be pretty canonical Buddy tunes for people.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the Apartment tapes is another early clue to the new direction, in a sense that I think that he was going back to the drawing board and he was retooling and reconfiguring himself for the future. I'm not saying it would have been folky just because he's sitting there with a guitar.
These songs work quite well as rock songs with the embellishments put on posthumously.
You know, I know people like to knock those, but the fact you could do that with those, he recorded himself really well.
Yeah.
He borrowed or took an Ampex from the Clovis studio. And so those are pretty state-of-the-art recordings. That's why they sound so good. So it goes to show they're self-recorded and not like the basement tapes. They're self-recorded like really well.
Yes.
In the apartment. Releasably well. I think Buddy would have always been on the cutting edge. That's what I think. I think I can safely say, whether it's with recording techniques, whatever, I don't think he would have ever grown cobwebs of any kind.
No.
There would always been a fealty to him because the scene that arose past him in the 60s was indebted to him, and happily so. I still think had he lived, he would have still cast not only a long shadow, but I think he would have been right there. I've tried to think of like a lot of those acts, like the Everly Brothers and stuff. They did beautiful stuff in the 60s, but they were always a little behind what was happening. You know what I'm saying? Even Elvis.
Yeah. In some cases more than others. Everly's, at least they were hip enough to go to England and record with English backings and do collaboration stuff. They kept moving to a point. What you just made me think of, though, with Buddy is that look at the commonalities he's got with the Beatles. He is always moving forward, doesn't repeat anything. He's curious and just wants to move on to the next thing instead of just sort of writing, that'll be the day part 2 or something. He keeps going. And I think that had he lived, you would see more and more of the evidence of that stuff. His embrace of technology, his open-mindedness to working with people like a King Curtis, which is totally not his comfort zone at all. That to me speaks really well about the fact that the world was an open book to him.
Yeah.
He was not going to be stuck in any particular channel. Does the orchestration thing, tries that on. He's just continually in motion.
Yeah.
That boded really well for how the 60s would have unfolded for him had he lived.
Yeah, I agree. And I think True Love Ways is a masterpiece. I know that he sang that live with the orchestra. There's versions where you can hear him kind of like clear his throat.
Yeah, the count off and all that.
Give him a note on a piano. But that is an astounding performance. It is a beautifully recorded performance. It's so sonic. It's so high tech. And he's right there with the orchestra, kind of not unlike Nilsson is on those 73 recordings.
Touch of Schmelson in the Night?
Touch of Schmelson in the Night, where he's just sitting there and he's at the top of his game. To think of Buddy at 22 singing like that, and what an incredible song that is, True Love Ways. I've never heard anything like it come along. It's remotely like it. The simplicity of that song, but also just the sentiment of it and the originality of it. I know that supposedly Norman Petty wrote the words or whatever, but the title had to be his. I'm just guessing because he just had this way of turning phrases, Buddy. That'll be the day. You know, obviously taking that from the John Wayne movie, but True Love Ways, this kind of way that he put things.
Well, all right.
Just this way of kind of pinpointing and doing it just a twisty little turn of phrase. I don't know if it's like a Southern Texas thing, but that you haven't heard since and you probably didn't hear at the time. And it's really unique, you know. I've taken, have you been to Lubbock?
I've not been to Lubbock, no. But I've been to where the surf is.
Clear Lake.
In Mason City.
Yeah, so that was one thing that we connected. I said, well, shoot, I've been to Lubbock and you've been to Clear Lake. That's kind of interesting.
Yes, beginning and end.
Beginning and the end.
We'll go to Clovis together.
Oh, God. The studio in Clovis, which is intact, I guess, as a museum, was operational up until not long ago. And I always had a deep, deep desire to record there, go there, just pay homage, go. But it's so in the middle of nowhere. Clovis is like on the border of New Mexico and Texas, I guess. So my parents at one point lived in New Mexico, but when I would look at the map, it's just still just so far from Clovis. You pretty much have to go way out of your way. But Lubbock is a trip. I've been there a couple times. I've been to his grave, and people leave little crickets, little rubber crickets and little guitar picks and stuff. And when you go to the hometown of someone like that, you can see it all becomes kind of palpable. But I wonder what that was like to go to see the Surf Ballroom and stuff.
I'll tell you. And I've shared this with one of my friends who then took up the experience. There's a guy that's been doing the Winter Dance Party now for, I want to say at least 20 years, named John Mueller, who does a perfect spot-on embodiment of Buddy in a way that Gary Busey didn't quite manage. Not to keep bashing on Gary Busey, but he does the show. He traces the itinerary of the Winter Dance Party. And back before the Willowbrook Ballroom in Chicago burned down, he was hitting that every year at the appropriate time of year. But the tour would always end at the surf in Clear Lake. And he still does that every year. He had for a time Bopper's son doing Bopper's act and Richie Valens' nephew doing his act. So you got the full experience. And Bopper's son has since died, and I don't know what happened with Richie, but he's been replaced by somebody else. You step into the surf, it is like stepping right into 1959. They still have the phone booth there that he made his last call from.
God.
And you can feel it. It's like the sort of pilgrimage when people go to England and see Mendips or Portland or the Cavern or something like that. It's the real deal.
Wow.
You just absolutely feel it. I'm a little disenchanted with the crash site. When I went there, it was still the way it had been for years and years. The 3 little records there representing the 3 artists that died. But since that time, somebody put those oversized glasses frames there, which I think just turns it into McDonald's. I'm not real happy about that. But it's there.
I didn't realize they had a memorial there at the crash site.
I think it's sort of ad hoc. I don't think it was like done by the city or anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And did you make a specific pilgrimage to Clear Lake?
Absolutely.
Wow.
We made that road trip expressly for that. Yep.
I definitely, when I first went to Lubbock, I was on tour with my old band, the Freewheelers, and we were driving through Texas, and I think we had a gig in Odessa or something, or somewhere. And
were you within distance to make the little trip?
Well, I knew we were passing through Lubbock. And I said, guys, we got to see Buddy's grave. We just have to. And everyone kind of agreed, but like we were definitely on a time schedule. And it was a little bit of a diversion. And I was like, come on, man, we're here, and I kind of talked everybody into it. So we went, and we got there, and I think it was like a Saturday. I was like, oh man, it might be closed. But apparently we got in, we were driving around, and I was kind of getting a little dispirited because like we just didn't see it. And there was no one, that's what it was. It was a Saturday. You could go in, but there was no one to show you anything. Oh. So finally, I think my friend Jason, our bass player, says, oh, is that it? It's Holly, but with an E. And I go, stop the van. Uh-huh. And we went and took some pictures and stuff like that. Of course, I did make us incredibly late for the gig. So
did you stand there at the grave singing Heartbreak Hotel in harmony?
Yeah, exactly. Just like that. A little more raga, please. But no, it was definitely like, that was just cool. It was like, did put a little reality to it. And I think, there's a statue in town. And then I think I was in Lubbock one other time since, and Buddy Holly Boulevard and whatever they call it. But
is this childhood house anything?
I didn't go see that. And there's other famous people from Lubbock too. Mm-hmm. So, obviously Sonny Curtis and a few other people, but it's really, really interesting just to be there and feel it and go, wow, this is where Buddy grew up and where he walked around and, learned his trade and everything.
He did a rooftop gig somewhere. I'd always wondered about.
Is that where the Beatles got the idea?
Who knows? But it was like at a drive-in restaurant or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. I wondered if that building was still around.
I never heard that. Oh, that's amazing. Uh-huh. As I got older, I learned more about him. Things would come out too. So you could dive into Buddy and Bob, and which is just totally legit country Western stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Obviously, rock and roll didn't exist when he was growing up and learning to play guitar and all that stuff. So that would have been his environment. There's like that wire recorder audio of him before his voice changes.
I've heard that just in passing. It's fascinating.
Yeah, Two-Timing Woman or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of all too real, and I know we're a couple of Buddy obsessives here, as anyone could tell, but I think, again, how personable he must have been, how vulnerable he must have been, how accessible his music just seems to the average kid.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that you just put your finger on something right there. That I know there was a quote from Clapton floating around. He fell in love with Peggy Sue, and the thing that was incredibly empowering to him was seeing Buddy on TV. Maybe it was the Palladium show, I'm not sure what, doing Peggy Sue and recognizing that he got all those changes on guitar, like moving one finger. And he's like, oh my God, it just demystified it for him.
Yes.
It's like, I thought that was beyond my reach, but here he is doing it. It's that easy. And that is the thing about Buddy's music is it was so educational to people. I know there's the story of the Quarrymen. It took them forever to master the opening of That'll Be the Day till George finally cracked the code. Yeah. And I always wondered if that was what made them commemorate it by going down to Percy Phillips and recording it. Is
probably,
like, yeah,
because that's how you are when you're a kid. You go like, whoa, we got it. Let's just do it
before it goes away.
I think we're getting to the Holy Grail here, which is, the Beatles' first recording.
Right.
The Quarrymen is That'll Be the Day. I mean, if that doesn't seal the case in court, that's the one,
There's this great quote from George I found, and I believe it's from 74, maybe. He was doing a lot of press for the Dark Horse tour, and they asked him about Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
He goes,
I think one of the greatest people for me was Buddy Holly, because first of all, he sang, wrote his own tunes, was a guitar player, and he was very good, exceptionally good. But as a guitar player, I started trying to learn the guitar, and I got a manual, and it showed me all the wrong chords. It showed me like one or two fingers. It showed me C to G. I learned this. And then a few months or a year later, I found, stupid buggers have given me a manual that doesn't show me all the notes. So then I have to start learning again. But Buddy Holly was the first time I ever heard A to F sharp minor.
Yeah.
Isn't it? And A to F sharp minor, fantastic. He's opening up new worlds there. And then A to F, Peggy Sue. Buddy Holly was sensational. So, I mean, a little bit of that rubbed off in as much as I no longer have a fear of changing from A to F.
For anyone out there who's a non-musician, what he's trying to say with this A to F thing is that is really unusual. That is an unusual change for early rock and roll. And
it's not a natural change.
It's not a natural
physically.
change. And that's that really interesting part when he goes, Peggy Sue, pretty, 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 pretty Peggy Sue. That really interesting change you'll hear in the record.
Uh-huh.
That is what I would call Beatlesque.
Uh-huh.
I would call...
When it's really Holly-esque.
It's Holly-esque. But when people refer to being Beatlesque, they refer to interesting chord changes.
Exactly.
And I think that they just hadn't had this example, like someone they look up to. It's like an older brother, someone who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, nerdy, whatever, who wrote his own stuff, who played this really interesting, cool Stratocaster that was kind of a novel guitar, by the way, too. And then you have these interesting chord changes under these hiccuping, really expressive vocal. I mean, the hiccuping vocal, it kind of almost puts across like awkward teenage energy.
Yeah.
And but I think that every turn he has arresting chord changes, even if it's the simplest song. That'll be the day coming in on the 4. Well, that'll be the day. He doesn't come in on the 1, he's in on the 4 and keeps resolving to the 1. It's really just modern is what it is. It's very modern, and it really hasn't been built upon since. When you do something now, just even in modern pop, I remember this song With or Without You by U2.
Yeah.
Certain chord progression. That's pretty much the chord progression like every pop song uses now. It's like C to G, A minor to F kind of thing. Kind of gets sort of repeated ad nauseum and recycled. And there's a similar thing that's going on with Buddy, like That'll Be the Day, where if you to start with the 4, end on a 4, whatever, to do things, to take the simple chord changes, but kind of like rearrange them a bit. And that's, I know this is kind of getting into more esoteric territory, but I hear it all the time in pop music. It's a way of bringing out a little bit of melancholy into the music. You kind of just rearrange the chords, or you put a surprise chord change in, which not a lot of people do now, because there's a lot of resistance to being quote unquote weird now in pop. It's much more cookie cutter now.
Yeah.
If the second it's subversive or weird, it's selling a lot less copies, and it's relegated to kind of like you're indie, or you're down here, you're not in heavy duty commercial pop territory. Nonetheless, there's just countless things that Buddy did, whether it's the turn of phrase, married to the turning around the chord changes, married to the odd chord thrown in, like in Peggy Sue, and I can think of a bunch of others in the Apartment tapes that just set him apart. It just set him apart. It just wasn't rockin' daddy, 4 on the floor kind of stuff.
Right. Predictable stuff.
Piano, blah, 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 blah. And the Beatles loved all that other shit.
Right.
There's no doubt about it. I often say, it's like you take the Everly Brothers, you take Buddy Holly, you take Little Richard, you pretty much get the Beatles. Maybe throw in a little like sort of Motown, kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. And you'd mentioned the young Buddy looking up to big rock star Elvis. There is any number of pictures of Buddy hanging with the Everlys, like the third brother.
Yes.
Like they were that tight. And
yes,
you can definitely see a cross current there, that if the Everly Brothers and Buddy had a baby, it would be the Beatles.
100%. And actually, Buddy did write a song for the Everlys called Wishing. And another example of his forward thinking in the studio was that he wanted to demonstrate it to them. So he did both harmonies. And how do you do that back then? You have to put something over the record head so it won't record over what you did previously. And you can then add, I think Ray Charles did it on I Believe to My Soul because the Raylettes couldn't get the part. So he did, if you listen to I Believe to My Soul, that's not the Raylettes, that's all Ray going over it on tape, multi-tracking.
So like what Les Paul and Mary Ford were doing?
Exactly. Just kind of based on that. It's just an understood technique where you could go over the record head and then you're able to keep recording over it. However it does it, so it doesn't erase the previous take.
Right.
So you have Buddy doing Wishing, you have that amazing Tommy Alsop solo, and you can completely hear the Everlys do that song.
Yeah.
And I think they only didn't get around to it because they probably either A, didn't know about it, or he died too quickly. But when you listen to that tune, that's the Beatles right there.
Right.
It really is. You got George kind of doing that solo, that's the Tommy Alsop thing. You have the twin harmonies. You have that kind of wishing, bum, 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 bum. You kind of have that kind of Tom stuff like the Ringo stuff. I really look at that as a prototypical Beatles tune in a way.
Undoubtedly, yeah.
More so than Words of Love, because Words of Love is just so straight down the line. They're just doing a Buddy.
Yeah.
I don't know if he did the same technique on Words of Love. I think someone else is singing the harmony there. I think
that's Buddy.
It might be Buddy, so he might have done the same thing.
Yeah. And Mailman was the flip of that, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. Yeah. Was that a single?
It was a single, yeah.
Another single, I think, that didn't do anything. I think Buddy released quite a few.
Right. But the right ears found it.
The right ears found it. And then you have all those, after he died, you have all these kind of crazy tribute records. And then the Crickets kind of get a second life.
Yeah.
Some really great underrated shit, too.
Oh, it's very good. Yeah. Crickets had several singers, one of whom was Sonny Curtis, the aforementioned. For anybody who doesn't know, Sonny Curtis is the guy that wrote and sang the theme to the Mary Tyler Moore Show, Love Is All Around.
That's crazy that he wrote that. But he wrote Walk Right Back.
I Fought the Law.
Right. Oh, I Fought the Law, Walk Right Back for the Everlys.
Yes, right. And More Than I Could Say, that Leo Sayer had the hit with.
Right, which is very, very Buddy. Whoa, yay.
Exactly. Yeah. They also had a singer named David Box briefly. Do you know about him?
David Box. I've heard the name.
Yeah, I think he was quite young when he was in the Crickets as a singer, got killed in a small plane crash.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you have these kind of Buddy knockoffs too, like Bobby V, people like that, right?
And there's the Dylan connection.
The Dylan connection, right. So
Elton Gunn,
right. So for anyone who doesn't know, Dylan's first gig he ever got on the road was touring with Bobby V.
As piano player.
As the piano player, probably not a very good one. And
he didn't last that long. And he called himself Elston Gunn with like 3 N's at the end. But years later, when he was doing a concert, apparently, I want to say in Minnesota maybe, but Bobby V, who by that time was ill, it was before he died, was in attendance.
That's right.
And Dylan did this great call out from the stage about, I've heard he's here tonight, let's give him a big round. And they did a Bobby V song, but he just said how much he meant to him. He goes, I played with everybody on stage, from the Stones to Madonna, blah, blah, but just praising Bobby V effusively. And Bobby V got his start as a guy that I guess took a Buddy spot in the Winter Dance Party, right?
That's right. And he was kind of among a stable of these kind of Buddy types, where whether it be, Sonny Curtis with the Crickets or whether it be Bobby V or all these, there was a kind of pervasive buddiness in a lot of that post-crash rock and roll.
Right.
After, quote unquote, the music died.
Looking for the next Buddy.
Yeah. And wasn't there, maybe a mistake, Sheila?
Oh, Tommy Rowe.
Oh, Sheila, right.
A beautiful homage, which the Beatles then took up and were recorded at the Star Club performing as well.
Right. And then again, it goes and goes and goes because then you have these Buddy knockoffs in Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. Jeremy Spencer was an odd bird because he'd either do this Stone Cold Elmore James thing or he'd do a straight up Buddy thing with something like Linda, right? Or whatever. So I do feel that there's these ripples and reverberations after the crash where people needed to fill that space somehow musically. Right there, that gets to the heart of why the Beatles, part of why they could have happened, is that there was a musical space not being filled there.
Absolutely. That sensibility from the first wave of rock and roll to the sophistication that Buddy was pointed in that direction too.
Yeah.
That didn't get to fulfill. They took up the torch.
Absolutely. And I do feel that he's one of the few artists you can listen to from the rock and roll era of the 50s that, as much as I love Little Richard, I love Elvis, I love Jerry Lee, I love them all. But when you listen to it, you're so clearly kind of going, yeah, I'm listening to the 50s. you put on Buddy and it just doesn't feel like that.
Transcendental.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel weirdly like nostalgic or something. And I don't know if that just speaks to his influence down the ages.
Or our own subjectivity.
Yeah. Well, maybe so, but I even still like it just doesn't sound like the other shit. And I get that sometimes too with the Everlys. You know, that's another, I'm a huge fan of the Everlys, but there is something about those two acts that transcended their era. They brought that twang, they brought that country western vibe in and just straddled that line. It could be perceived at the time, as you said, as R&B. By some quarters, it could be perceived as country, but he just cut it his own way, didn't he?
I wonder if it's because the people that were his disciples, like the Beatles and all these other people we've talked about, took it forward and kept it fresh, kept it modern. The DNA from Buddy is there, but here is a latter day iteration of it. And just as there are people in the 80s and the 90s that took up something from the Beatles, that may be an extension of what they took from Buddy. It just keeps recycling.
I think if you listen to the British Invasion, which is the next big wave after the first wave of rock and roll in America, if you listen to the British Invasion, there's not a lot of Elvis. There's not a lot of Little Rich. I mean, it's there, they cover them and stuff, but they just all end up sounding kind of like Buddy because at the end of the day, they're these geeky white guys and, you know, their respective towns and they're just doing the best version they can of that hard-edged rock that they like. But at the end of the day, I fear that influence more on these countless bands, whether it's the Hollies or the Kinks or
Freddie Garrity.
Freddie and the Dreamers, right? Straight up. It was like that, the geekier side of Buddy. But wasn't the Who, weren't they huge Buddy Holly fans?
I'm trying to think if there's a direct...
I was reading recently that Pete was pretty influenced by him. I was like, where did
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm just trying to think of something directly. Oh, See My Way. You know that song?
Yeah, I do.
A Roger Daltrey credit from the Quick One album. And that's pretty much a Buddy rehash, is it not?
Yeah. Pete Townsend is an unlikely entry, perhaps, but Townsend got to play lead guitar on the 1970s Crickets recording Can I Make You Feel It as part of the Bubblegum Bop Ballads and Boogie album.
Wow.
Later, vocalist Roger Daltrey starred in the TV series Buddy, which chronicled the relationship between an aging Buddy Holly fan and his young son. To complete a brief trio of entries for the group, drummer Keith Moon, who had appeared in the UK movie That'll Be the Day, was to die tragically of drug overdose the morning after attending the UK film premiere of the Buddy Holly story.
There you go.
How's that? I have this, for anyone interested, the A to Z of Buddy Holly.
That's a rare book I don't own.
My Bible in the 90s of just, little...
I don't think I do.
You don't have this one? Oh, wow. I have another Buddy biography that's actually really good. I don't know what happened to it, but you may know the one I'm talking about, but I think it came out in the 90s. It's so well written. It's really the definitive one. I just can't remember the name of it.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about because there were two that I had at the same time. One was Philip Norman's and one wasn't. It's probably the one that wasn't.
I think it was the one that wasn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess the initial idea for the discussion was like Buddy and the Beatles. And it's kind of on the nose. I mean, everybody knows that if you're a huge Beatle fan and you're listening to the show, you know that it's inescapable for just a couple of major reasons, the name and the recording and all this stuff. But what's interesting to me about the conversation is just when you realize how his influence just splinters out, not just because the Beatles' influence is outsized and they're splintering off of Buddy, but it's just, it's almost like the shards and the shrapnel of that crash that just went everywhere, in some kind of weird way. Captures the imagination. And by the way, notwithstanding the Big Bopper, who I appreciate.
Have you heard his non-Chantilly Lace recordings?
I haven't heard a lot of that, I'd be really curious to,
There's a compilation Rhino did of his stuff, and it's quite good. He's sort of aligned with the Coasters in terms of this teenage situation comedy type song.
Okay.
And Richie, of course, he's gotten his film. I think at some point people were expecting a Bopper film to come along, but his story is worth telling for sure.
Well, Valens is a big, big influence on myself. He's kind of an LA thing. You can't really avoid it. I've been to his grave out here in San Fernando Valley. And again, it starts to get into, like I was talking about my dad and knowing kids that went to school with him, blah, blah, blah. But his area, what came out of Richie, and again, I get it. They're kind of interconnected just because of the crash, because of the tour.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Buddy was taking Richie under his wing. And, there's this information in that book we were talking about where I don't know if it's true or not, but apparently Buddy was going to start a label called Taupe. Have you heard anything about this?
No.
TAUPE, named after the color of his Cadillac.
Huh.
He was planning on signing Richie Valens, and he was going to sort of take him away from
Bob Keane and
Delphi
yeah.
Records. You know, Richie wasn't happy, and you know, Richie was really young. He was only 17 when he died, but apparently that's why he took him on the winter tour. And and I think that either Valens visited him in New York or he might have visited him in Texas. They visited each other's families at some point. But I guess they were getting kind of close. And that's what they were doing there. And I guess their plan was to record together. I think he wanted to take him into the studio. I think that's what it was.
Interesting.
Yeah. But Valens is, albeit young when he died, he's a giant in his own right, because pretty much all of like rock and Espanol, Latin rock, the influence. I mean, it's no coincidence that Los Lobos did the La Bamba soundtrack and all that, because they're a direct descendant of that genre of music, is sort of prototyped out by Valens.
Yeah.
And Valens had great records. I mean, Donna, La Bamba, and all these things.
My Head,
incredible stuff. So that's a really sad part of the tale. But apparently Buddy and Richie, that's a whole other what if, which I find totally fascinating.
And that's the thing I could see. We mentioned the King Curtis collaboration, who he would have worked with going forward.
Oh, God. I think that the Valens thing would have happened. And I think it was in that biography. I didn't find it anywhere. I looked up Taupe in this A to Z. I don't find anywhere there, but I've read in a couple sources that he wanted to start this label. And it makes sense, because like you look at Sam Cooke kind of later doing the same thing. Like,
oh yeah, right.
I think Buddy had a lot of ambition, and I could see it flying. I could see him fostering talent. Waylon Jennings along.
Yeah, absolutely.
He plucked him pretty much from obscurity, and look what ended up happening to him. And Waylon swears by his time with Buddy.
Absolutely. Tommy Alsop, who was the lead guitarist, do you know what he was responsible for down the road?
Yeah, so he produced some stuff.
Zager and Evans,
Jesus Christ. And Asleep at the Wheel, I think he produced, and he became like a Nashville producer or something.
I know he had a studio in Texas.
Okay, he had a studio in Texas.
That's where In the Year 2525 was recorded.
Yeah, Zager and Evans, yeah. Classic. And I think it's just kind of interesting to hear. So you take Waylon and you take him going off into country. So that's another early clue to the new direction, possibly Buddy. Buddy could have gone into country had he wanted to.
Country rock could have started 5 years or so sooner.
Country rock could have started 5 years. I mean, it's kind of like almost unthinkable, again, what the whole scene could have looked like had Buddy not died. What do you think? What's your gut instinct on the way things would have been different? Do you think, okay, here's a simple question. Would the Beatles have happened if Buddy had not died?
As you pointed out, they filled a space that needed to be filled, left in the void of his death. I guess it would have depended on how much Buddy was connecting with the public, because that whole era where the first wave sort of got sidelined for various reasons, Elvis in the Army, Buddy dying, Jerry Lee scandalized, Chuck Berry in jail, that whole thing. And then you see the rise of the producers and the record labels creating corporate-driven pop for the teen masses. The auteurs were gone till the Beatles came and took that space back. Now, had Buddy kept going as an auteur, I guess his impact would have depended on how much he was being listened to. But I think that as an individual artist and explorer, he would have kept going on the path we've described of trying on different things and not repeating himself, just constantly moving forward.
Totally.
But I suspect he was a little ahead of the curve.
I think the Beatles would have still happened, because I think Buddy would have probably stayed on what we now think of as an easy listening track just for a minute with this True Love Ways. It doesn't matter anymore. He could have gotten a little bit MOR for a minute just because he kind of was trying it out, and then maybe that something would have stuck. He probably would have had a smash in that way. He would have maybe mined a vein for a minute. He would have been on a different track, I think, the Beatles, but something tells me a la Elvis, and maybe even sooner, he would have found his rock and roll heart again and really come out blazing, and maybe even collaborated. So we're getting to crazy talk, but I think that the Beatles would have killed to collaborate with him. There's no doubt about it.
They could have been, what was it? The Nashville Teens. The way they backed Jerry Lee at the Star Club when he did his live album there.
Oh yeah, sure.
See something like that happen.
Exactly. Oh God.
Yeah.
Now you're getting this territory of Buddy goes to Hamburg a la Jerry Lee and then gets backed by a band like the Beatles. right? Just because he's got some opportunity there. And you could have had an incredible recording there. And you can see it too. The Beatles were this ripping band. They were just, by the time Jerry Lee was going there, the Beatles had already blown up. But had this happened little bit earlier, I mean, Buddy died in 59. The Beatles were going.
End of 1960.
The Beatles were going. They were in 60. They came back from Harvard. What was Litherland Town Hall was when? Like end of 1960. It's kind of incredible. And Buddy would have gone back to the UK. So they could have found themselves a backing band for him. No, it's not unthinkable because of that. What's the one concert where
you're talking about the New Brighton Tower?
The thing where Eddie Cochran was supposed to play.
Yeah. And Gene Vincent and Rory Storm got to play that gig
because of the car accident.
Right.
Okay, so Rory Storm got to play that gig, and they end up. Did they back Gene Vincent?
I don't know if they did or if they didn't. I know they were on the bill. That much I know.
But I think there was some rock and roll people that were on the bill still, right?
Yeah, it was Gene Vincent. Eddie obviously was dead, but there were the locals.
But the Beatles did end up hanging out with Gene Vincent.
They did, and also Little Richard.
They didn't back either, but they were. I think at that time they were starting to get too big.
Yeah, it was 62, 63. Yeah,
but you could see Buddy tour 59, then maybe tour 60. And then, like, the Beatles aren't quite there yet. They get the opportunity to back him.
61, 62, they were ready.
It's really not unthinkable.
No, it's not.
And then you start, and then even if they completely led distinctly diverted paths, you could see Toronto, 69. Totally happen. Buddy's on the bill. If Jerry Lee can be on the bill and Little Richard and,
Maybe you've seen all four Beatles show up.
And in that case, all four Beatles show up, right? Exactly.
All it's just Little Richard.
Well, I think the rock and roll revival did happen. It did happen, eventually kind of culminating in things like Chuck Berry getting a number one hit with My Ding-a-Ling and all this kind of stuff. And I think that the rock and roll revival would have at least been there waiting. It helped Gene Vincent. Gene Vincent used to tour the UK, and it would have been there waiting for Buddy, I think. Had there been no other luck, had he kind of fallen by the wayside, God forbid, in any way, which was easy. It happened to all his contemporaries. I still think he had the edge because he was a great songwriter.
Yeah.
I think he would have undoubtedly, if Sonny Curtis could do it.
And he had the ambition.
He had the ambition. He had the scope. Sonny Curtis, without even blinking, was still able to get tons of covers and be a really well-regarded songwriter into the 70s and 80s. So I think Buddy would still have that track going for him. And then had he wanted to, had it not really happened for him commercially as an artist, God forbid, I just even think about this is crazy. I think that revival would have been waiting for him. I really do. I think it would have done some really interesting things. And there was always these pit stops along the way, because if it didn't happen for him then, it would happen in the Happy Days era. There would have been a movie. And then if it didn't happen then, Paul McCartney would have been waiting with Wings to back him and do that same album, but with him, Holidays. It would have always been there for him because he was so revered and so loved and so influential. I just think when you're talking about Buddy, you're talking about someone kind of outsized, like I sort of said at the beginning. The scope of his influence is massive. It just is.
Joe B. and Jerry Allison backed the Everlys for a time after Buddy was killed, but both of them are on Clapton's solo debut, the one with Let It Rain on it.
Are they?
Yeah, they are.
See, that's incredible. And those things were just done kind of quietly, right? These guys were just quietly fans.
Yeah.
People like Page and stuff were massive Buddy. All these guys cut their teeth on Buddy. So there would have been too many opportunities from too many superstars for Buddy not to thrive in some way or another. And it's almost sad when you talk about it, because you realize he wasn't there. It didn't happen. He died way too tragically, way too young. It's just one of those things. That's why they call it The Day the Music Died. There's a huge number one song about it.
Right.
That stopped time at that moment, Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like one of those things where to even pose the question, you've already got your answer. Of course, Buddy would have a place in music, no matter what he did. It's almost like an emotional thing to talk about because it just makes it all the more bittersweet. It's kind of like, damn, he really did make this monumental impact that you almost can't really calculate. It's hard to tally it. Anything that remotely touches him goes on to do something in the most just map covering, like far reaching way. It's pretty cool. And I think that focusing on Buddy and the Beatles is a nice, neat way of tying it up in a bow where you can say, look, he influenced the Beatles influenced everybody. Case closed. I rest my case, Your Honor.
Right.
And to play the game of what would he have done? That's interesting. But would he have had a place and would he have been influential, all that, had he left? Of course he would have.
Unquestionably.